With Halloween upcoming, we are approaching one of my favorite times of year, and I wanted to celebrate that fact by discussing something rather frightening within A Song of Ice and Fire. For a fantasy series, it sure has a lot of zombies. I was big into zombies growing up, I loved the Walking Dead comic and parts of the show, and I was very excited to hear that fact in Ice and Fire, as we do have zombies of ice and fire. Of course, the White Walkers are able to raise these undead wights, these fairly traditional zombies that, as far as we know, can be killed with fire and don't seem to have any kind of higher cognition beyond what is instilled in them by their creator. Additionally, we know that the Lord of Light can raise individuals from the dead, such as he does, I believe, 6 times with Beric Dondarrion, and then once again with Lady Stoneheart. Today, I wanted to talk about neither of those, but rather an anomaly as the series goes so far. There is one particular individual who seems to be undead that is kind of raised by means that seem to be removed from these religions of ice and fire. It seems to be something maybe more alchemical, maybe more scientific, maybe more straight up magical. Today, I want to discuss Robert Strong, elements of his creation, and his potential role in the Winds of Winter. Robert Strong, tragically to certain theories, is not just some new guy who appears at the very end of A Dance with Dragons in Cersei's last chapter, being named to the Kingsguard and likely fighting as her champion in a trial by combat in the Winds of Winter. We'll get to that in a minute, but spoilers for A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons here. Robert Strong is actually the undead Gregor Clegane. Gregor fights Oberyn in this very famous trial by combat, which is probably my favorite fight scene in the entire show, if not fiction, at least when discussing the televised version of it. During that fight, he was stabbed several times by a poisoned spear, and despite him winning the fight by crushing Oberyn Martell's skull, Gregor is not tragically, he's the worst person in the series. That's debatable. He's up there as one of the worst people in the series. Regardless, he dies with the poison that Oberyn left on his spear sometime early in A Feast for Crows. Or does he? Gregor's care is given over to Qyburn, a man who was once a maester before his chain was taken away for unearthly experiments by the maesters at the Citadel. It seems like there are some pretty sketchy things going on in Qyburn's dungeon throughout A Feast for Crows, as he's continually requesting that Cersei give him people that she doesn't like, and they end up dying screaming or being quite used up throughout. It's honestly pretty horrifying and something that does go on in the background throughout A Feast for Crows, and it is fascinating to kind of see Cersei's thoughts on it, as she's very much trying not to think about it, as she's okay with these things happening, but she just kind of resides in that realm where she can have plausible deniability and not really think of what's happening to these people who she's just giving to Qyburn. But it seems like whatever Qyburn is doing with them is yielding some positive results for his experimentation, because it seems like Gregor Clegane doesn't actually die. He's this massive guy, 8 feet tall, bigger than anyone else in Westeros, and then in A Dance with Dragons, Qyburn magically produces someone 8 feet tall, bigger than anyone else in Westeros, to the point where it is automatically remarked upon by Kevin in the next subsequent chapter after Cersei's last chapter in A Dance with Dragons, that being his epilogue. There is an interesting complication in the continued survival of Gregor Clegane, given the fact that the Lannisters have just given Gregor's head to the Dornish. We see that arrive in the Watcher chapter of A Dance with Dragons after being sent off in A Feast for Crows, and regardless of the magic that is going on in the series, the ability of certain individuals to raise these undead back to this form of unlife, it seems as though they still need to have their bodies intact in order to do so. The most egregious wounds we've seen kind of cured by this are Beric Dondarrion's stab to the eye and Stoneheart's throat being slit, but we have no evidence to suggest that someone could survive without a head, save for unless we're counting the mountain. There is this vision that Bran has in the first book of a giant made of stone with black blood under their helmet, which is fascinating. The black blood obviously could refer to this kind of thickened blood by the poison that Oberyn used and whatever Qyburn is using to keep Gregor slash Robert alive. And that blood being beneath the helm could potentially indicate the fact that Robert Strong could be this Headless Horseman figure. With that said, I'm not exactly sure how a body would function in such a way. There's a fairly substantive textual basis for the idea that Gregor Clegane's head was not in fact sent to the Dornish. Specifically, in the chapter where we first hear about Cersei's idea to send this down as sort of a measure to pacify this region that could break out in rebellion, she also receives a very large dwarf head as she has a bounty out for Tyrion, and people are just bringing her random heads that they think might look like him in the hopes of getting raised to lordship. Additionally, there is some evidence from older drafts that Martin at some point intended the mountain head that is sent down to Dorne to be illegitimate. First and foremost, it is just a skull, so we really have no direct way of knowing, but in that draft, we specifically see a note that the mountain's skull is missing teeth. As far as we know, the mountain is not missing any teeth. He's been in a lot of fights, so that's something that could plausibly have happened, but given that this is written in a note as something fairly substantial, I believe it was at one point intended to be a hint that the mountain's head was not truly in Dorne. With that being said, if the head sent to Dorne is legitimate, I do kind of like the idea of this truly unnatural being literally being a headless horseman. Or additionally, there could be some other head that Qyburn just kind of Frankenstein on there, or Frankenstein's monstered on there, I suppose, if you will. As we know that he has sent a number of people, which I already discussed, in addition to having this dwarf head potentially, or even, this is a really dark example, but Qyburn's first act for Cersei is being given Shay's body to dispose of. So, hey, maybe Robert Strong has Shay's head. I was also considering doing a video on all of Westeros's types of undead. I think it could be a fun examination. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments. Also, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss it. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help the channel. Regardless of the head situation that I've been spending too much time on, there is undoubtedly going to be some big moment of reveal on who exactly this figure is at Cersei's trial by combat. That is the occasion for which Robert Strong is finally unveiled and introduced, added to the Kingsguard, and it is going to be his glorious purpose, allowing him to clear his queen's name, as he's taken a vow of silence until all of the queen's enemies are dead. If in this combat, the helmet of this monster is knocked off, we will likely see either the head of Gregor Clegane under there, or maybe the head of other individuals. But regardless, it is going to be clear not only that this is the body of Gregor Clegane, but there is some incredibly dark sorcery here that has directly been commissioned by Cersei Lannister. I do think that Gregor is going to win that trial by combat, Robert rather, sorry, I did not mean to undead name Gregor there, but regardless, I think that he is very likely to win given the fact that he was unstoppable in life, and unless this is entirely a facade, he's probably even more unstoppable in death, but that does raise some questions. Cersei being destroyed politically by using an undead in this most holy of trials is going to be probably half the battle going forward. The other half is literally just this undead guy, because Robert Strong is undoubtedly going to be one of the most capable fighters in Westeros. He also doesn't seem to need to breathe, to sleep, to eat, to speak, to do anything, and all of these forces in or around King's Landing opposing Cersei, the Tyrells, the Faith, Aegon eventually, this young prince who's come to claim his supposed throne. All of them have a mountain to climb before they would be able to actually get Cersei out of power, as Gregor is this undead force of, I wouldn't say nature, who would very much be able to thwart anything. It's unclear also what's going to happen in the event that something happens to his creator. We know in at least one form of undeath in this universe, the Wights and the others. The creator, the White Walker, the other, has at least some semblance of control over their thrall. I don't think it's going to be like if you kill the White Walker, all the Wights die, like was the case in that terrible show on HBO. I don't think that'll necessarily be the case, but they clearly have some means of influence and the ability to kind of raise them and direct them in the directions that they want to conquer. Qyburn is the person who raised Robert Strong. What happens if Qyburn dies? What happens if Cersei dies? If either of these things happen, I have genuinely no idea what Robert Strong would do or would even be capable of doing. Are they somehow magically linked? Qyburn and Robert specifically? It's unclear. We see the kind of Frankenstein's monster killing his creator in the show, but that would imply that Robert Strong has some sort of free will and maybe some semblance of Gregor Clegane remaining under there. As we know, undeath changes you in the case of the Lord of Light, but there is still some semblance of the person in there, unlike White Walker Wights. Robert Strong isn't an ice wight. He isn't a fire wight. I think he's a blood wight, for the lack of a better term. Specifically, Qyburn was trained as a maester. We know of only one individual he got along with at the Citadel, that being Marwyn the Mage, Archmaester of the Higher Mysteries, and someone who has traveled the world and dabbled in many magics. In those world travels, we know of exactly one other person that Marwyn the Mage has tutored in his time and in his travels, that being one Mirri Maz Dur, who we encounter late in the Game of Thrones with Daenerys Targaryen and Khal Drogo. Daenerys tasks Mirri with curing Khal Drogo's infection and saving his life, which she is able to do, technically. We see Mirri engage in a blood sacrifice, killing a horse and potentially using the souls of others around Drogo to fuel this healing of his body and this effectively rebirth of the character, despite the fact that his soul seems to be elsewhere at some point, as he is living by the time Daenerys wakes from having this stillborn child, but he is no longer himself. He's kind of comatose. He's maybe a horse, if Aglaidus theory is to be believed, which is very good. I know that theory is a meme now because of the horse thing, but The Price of Life and Death I genuinely love, and I think there's a non-zero chance that Qyburn did something very similar with Gregor Clegane, given the fact that he did continually ask for people to fuel whatever he's doing, and we know that this blood magic is not only something that requires this fuel of life, only life can pay for death, we know that he is aware of it. Specifically, we know that he references blood magic or in Cersei's story in A Feast for Crows, when she asks him in Cersei 8 about this mage that had given her a prophecy about her eventual death and demise. There's one final piece of evidence for this theory, and it's an excellent catch by friend of the channel InGen, with whom I was discussing this theory at the point of scripting. I've actually come back and re-recorded this, because I didn't realize it initially when I'd recorded most of the script, but there is a hint in that prophecy I referred to earlier, where Bran 3, A Game of Thrones, shows us this vision of an undead Gregor with nothing inside his visor but darkness and thick black blood. In the lines preceding it, we are told there are shadows all around him. This is particularly significant as a key connection to the magic of Mirri Maz Dur as it manifests in Game of Thrones, because how does that magic manifest? It's in the shadows in the tent. Those are what rise up and swirl about and seem to be binding things. We hear continually about this practice of shadow binding in Ice and Fire, and it seems as though either what Melisandre got up to, or more likely what Mirri was doing, is some form of shadow binding, and the fact that this is coming from so early in the series and from the same book as Mirri Maz Dur herself, I think it's a pretty remarkable case for this having some connection to the form of magic and Mirri's origins and having learned it from Marwyn the Mage, as well as Qyburn. This raises some interesting questions, though. Qyburn seems to have done something that Mirri Maz Dur has not. It's unclear whether what Mirri did was successful or intentional or what, given the fact that it was saving Khal Drogo's life that did succeed, but ultimately he wasn't himself anymore, so maybe it failed, but also maybe Mirri wanted him to not be himself anymore because he was a terrible person. It's unclear. So this, Robert Strong, could be the truest version of what Mirri Maz Dur could have done. Maybe Drogo could have been kind of revived as this undead warrior in the way that Robert Strong has, but overall it is the two instances of this sort of magic that I think are the most similar in the series. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help grow the channel. I have many more videos for you in the very near future on A Song of Ice and Fire, House of the Dragon, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and Game of Thrones, and I hope you will join me for all of those. Next one should be out over the weekend. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited to sharing it with you, and yeah, I appreciate all support, and thank you again for watching. I also have a Patreon, which I keep forgetting to mention. It's in the description. Thank you again. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really